Every kid has secrets, little worlds they build in the space between the floorboards and the ceiling, populated by friends no one else can see. Most of us grow out of it. The friends fade like photographs left in the sun, their voices dissolving into the drone of the air conditioner or the sigh of the wind in the eaves. But for some, they don't fade. They linger. And these companions, the ones that stick around, almost always come with rules. Not fun rules like in a game of make-believe. These are the other kind. The kind you don't dare break. Take the story of a boy named Leo, who grew up in a drafty farmhouse just outside of Zanesville, Ohio. His friend lived under his bed. He didn't have a name for her. She was just the girl. During the day, she was quiet, but at night, when the house settled and the moon cast long shadows across the wooden floor, he knew she was awake. Her one and only rule was simple. From the moment his mom tucked him in until the first bird sang at dawn, his feet were not to touch the floor, not a toe, not a heel. He could get out of bed to use the bathroom, but he had to leap from the mattress clear to the woven rug by the door, no contact with the bare wood. He learned to hold it for hours. One night, a thunderstorm rattled the windows and knocked a glass of water from his nightstand. Without thinking, he swung his legs over the side of the bed, his foot reaching for the floor to steady himself. Before he could touch down, he felt an impossible cold radiate up from the floorboards. It was a damp, cellar-like cold. He yanked his foot back just as he saw it. From beneath the hanging edge of his comforter, 5 long, bone-white fingers had stretched out, reaching for his ankle. They paused, inches from his skin, before slowly, silently retracting back into the darkness. He never made that mistake again. His parents just thought he was afraid of the dark. They never understood why, even as a teenager, he still took a running leap into bed every single night. But not all of these friends are monsters hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they look terribly familiar. There was a girl in Pennsylvania, Chloe, whose friend looked exactly like her, a perfect twin, except for 2 details. This other Chloe never spoke aloud. She only whispered inside Chloe's head. And her smile was always just a little too wide, stretching just a bit too far at the corners of her mouth. Her rule was a strange one, a matter of identity. Chloe was never, under any circumstances, to call the smiling twin by her own name. She could call her sister, or you, or friend, but never Chloe. To do so, the twin whispered, would be rude. It would be like stealing. For years, Chloe obeyed. The twin was a comfort, a secret keeper. But as she got older, the presence felt less like a friend and more like a parasite. One afternoon, tired of the constant whispering, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror and said it. "Chloe, your name is Chloe. Leave me alone." For a moment, nothing happened. Then her reflection's smile widened into an unnaturally broad grin. The reflection raised a hand and waved, but in the real world, Chloe's own hand remained perfectly still at her side. She felt a cold dread wash over her, as the twin in the mirror mouthed 2 words back at her, words she felt echo in her skull. "No, yours is." From that day on, Chloe felt like a passenger in her own body. Her friends noticed she'd become quiet, distant, and sometimes they'd catch her staring at her own reflection with a smile that was just a little too wide for her face. Then there's the kind of story that gets under your skin because it feels like it could happen in any house on any quiet suburban street. It comes from a man who grew up in Edina, Minnesota in the late 1980s. He was a lonely kid named Mark, and his best friend lived in his closet. He called him Mr. Sticks. Mark never saw him, but he could hear him. At night, he'd press his ear to the louvered closet door and listen as Mr. Sticks whispered to him. He told him stories of the world before people, of the dark spaces between the stars. His parents were just happy he was occupying himself. The rule for this friendship was absolute. After his father said goodnight and the hall light clicked off, the closet door had to stay shut until morning, no matter what. At first, the sounds were comforting, a soft rustling, a gentle creak. But as the years went on, the sounds changed. Sometimes, late at night, Mark would hear a faint, dry scratching from inside. Not like a mouse. It was slower, more deliberate. Other nights, it was a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, or the unsettling clack of thin branches knocking together. The whispers became strained, desperate. He'd tell Mark he was lonely. He'd beg him to just open the door a crack, just to let a little light in. Mark would lie awake in his bed, sweating, his knuckles white as he gripped his blankets, and listened to the sounds from the closet grow more frantic. The worst night of his life was when he was 12. He woke up to the sound of soft tapping on the door, not from the inside, but the outside, on his bedroom door. He heard his father's voice, groggy. "Mark, you okay in there? I thought I heard you up." The doorknob began to turn. A wave of pure instinctive terror seized Mark. "Don't!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Dad, don't open the door!" His father froze. From inside the closet, all sound had stopped. The silence was heavier, more terrifying than any noise that had come before it. His dad slowly let go of the knob. "Okay, son, get some sleep." The next morning, Mark noticed a long, thin scratch running down the outside of his bedroom door, starting from near the doorknob and going all the way to the floor. Later that day, he dragged his dresser in front of the closet and never spoke to Mr. Sticks again. To this day, he can't stand the sound of branches scraping against a window pane in the wind.
And in our world now, the hiding places have changed. They're no longer just physical. The shadows our children talk to can live inside the devices we give them to keep them quiet. A story has been circulating online, a modern piece of folklore about a 6-year-old named Maya and her tablet. Her parents noticed she kept talking about her jumping friend. They assumed it was a character from one of the hundreds of mindless cartoons she watched on a popular video app. The jumping friend, she explained, had big black eyes and a body made of bright, colorful clay. He would appear in the ads between videos. He told her things. And he had a very important rule. He would present a link, a little button that said, "Play with me." And she must never ever let the ad timer run out. She had to click the link. If she didn't, the jumping friend would get sad. Her parents didn't think much of it until the tablet started acting strangely. The recommended videos became bizarre. Learn your colors, red like blood. Funny accidents on the playground. What does a siren sound like outside your window? One evening, Maya's father was sitting with her as she watched. The ad popped up. A jerky, stop-motion character made of mismatched clay, with huge vacant black buttons for eyes, bounced on the screen. The father watched the 5-second countdown timer. As it hit 2, Maya lunged forward and jabbed the link with her finger. "You have to click it, Daddy," she whispered, her eyes wide. "He gets so sad." The next day, her father decided to test it. He put on a video and waited. The ad with the clay man appeared. This time, he held the tablet his thumb over the skip ad button that would appear. He let the timer hit 0. He hit skip ad. The cartoon Maya was watching resumed. But that night, as he was putting her to bed, Maya started crying. She said the jumping friend was mad at him now. When her father picked up the tablet later to clear the history, he saw a new video on the recommended feed. The thumbnail was a blurry picture of their own front door, taken from the street. The title read, "I can still see you when you close your eyes." But the story that stays with me the most, the one that feels like it's been scraped from the deepest oldest layer of American dread is my own. My friend didn't live under the bed or in a closet. He lived in the glass. I first met him when I was 5, in the reflection of the big picture window in our living room after dark. He was a long, dark shape standing just behind me, taller than my dad and impossibly thin, like a silhouette cut from black paper. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He was just there, a silent observer in my periphery. I saw him in car windows, in murky puddles after a rainstorm, in the blank screen of the television set. He was my secret, a quiet comfort. He had one rule, and it was the only piece of knowledge he ever gave me, communicated not in words, but in a profound and certain understanding that settled deep in my bones. I was never, ever to turn around and look at him directly. I could look at his reflection all I wanted, but I must never turn to face the spot in the real world where he was standing. It was the most important rule of my life. The urge was sometimes maddening. 1,000 times I'd be staring at his dark shape in the window, my reflection a small pale moon against the night, and my neck muscles would twitch with the need to just spin around and see his face. But the feeling of dread that accompanied the thought was absolute, a primal certainty that looking would be the last thing I ever did. Years passed, I grew up. The reflections came less and less often, until one day I realized I hadn't seen him in over a decade. He became a strange, half-forgotten dream. I got married, we had a son. We moved into a new house, a nice place in the suburbs with a big family room. One evening, I was in the kitchen while my son, who was 6, was watching cartoons. The show ended and the screen went black. I heard my son talking. "No, I can't," he said, his voice soft. "That's the rule." A cold electric shock went through me, a feeling I hadn't felt since I was a child. I walked slowly to the doorway of the family room. My son was sitting on the floor looking at the dark television screen. I looked at the screen too, and in the faint reflection I saw my boy. And standing right behind his shoulder, I saw a tall, thin, familiar silhouette. It was closer to him than it ever was to me. My son turned his head slightly, still looking at the reflection. "He wants me to look at him," my son whispered, his eyes now fixed on my reflection in the glass. "Should I?"
There's a unique kind of darkness that you only find deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. It's the darkness of a summer camp. During the day, it's all forced enthusiasm, friendship bracelets, and the smell of sunblock. But when the sun goes down and the only light comes from a crackling fire, the counselors gather you close and tell you the real reason for the rules. They're not just about safety, they're about the stories. Every camp has them, legends that have soaked into the soil, tales that cling to the pine needles, and you quickly learn that the most important rule is to listen. It starts with the water. At Camp Sequoia, nestled in the murky folds of the Ozarks, the crown jewel was a dark, spring-fed lake. The number one rule, the one they repeated until it was burned into your brain, was no swimming after sunset. The counselor said it was about safety, about unseen rocks and currents. 4 boys from Cabin 7, all cocky 15-year-olds, decided that was a lie. On a humid July night, they slipped out of their cabin and crept down to the docks. The lake was a sheet of black glass under a sliver of moon. The air was thick with the sound of crickets. They dove in, one after another, the cold water a welcome shock. For a few minutes, it was perfect. They splashed and laughed in hushed voices. Then, one of them, a kid named Tyler, felt something brush against his leg. He said it felt long, smooth, and cold, like a massive fish. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice was tight. A moment later, another boy, Matt, yelled. It was a short, sharp sound, cut off abruptly. The others turned to where he'd been treading water. In the faint moonlight, they saw his head tilt back, his mouth open in a silent scream, and then he was gone. There was no struggle, no thrashing, just a smooth, quiet pull, as if a giant hand had reached up from the bottom and gently taken him. The remaining three scrambled for the dock, tripping over each other in a blind panic. They never found Matt's body. The official story was that he'd gotten a cramp and drowned. But the other boys knew. You don't get cramps from something long and smooth that brushes your leg in the dark. But some warnings aren't about monsters. They're about places. Places that remember. In upstate New York, Camp Blackwood was old, built in the 30s, and its most infamous spot was Cabin 9. The story was that back in the 70s, a quiet, withdrawn girl had stayed there. One morning, she was just gone. The counselors searched for weeks. They found nothing. The only thing out of the ordinary was inside the cabin, on the wall, above her empty bunk. It was covered in hundreds of tally marks, scratched deep into the wooden planks. The camp tried to paint over them, but the story stuck. The legend said that the cabin held an echo, a strange compulsion. And if you slept in the bunk beneath the marks, you might feel it too. Most kids were too scared to try, but a cynical camper named Sarah thought it was all a joke. She insisted on taking the bunk. She fell asleep tracing the old marks with her finger, wondering about the girl who'd made them. She woke up just before dawn with a stinging pain in her forearm. She looked down and saw a thin red line of blood welling up from a scratch. It was perfectly straight. As a cold fear trickled down her spine, she looked up at the wall. There, amidst the faded gray scratches, was a single fresh mark. It was dark, wet, and crimson. It hadn't been there when she went to sleep. She was out of that cabin before the sun was fully up, and refused to speak about it for the rest of the summer. She never forgot the feeling, not of being haunted, but of being counted.
Then you have the legends that feel older, woven into the landscape itself. At Camp Chippewa in Wisconsin, the warnings were about the dawn, specifically the thick fog that often blanketed the lake in the early hours. The counselors who ran the fishing expeditions had a special rule. If you saw the man in the canoe, you didn't look at him. You didn't point. You didn't wave. You just looked away and paddled back to shore. They said he was a fixture, a silent paddler in a birch bark canoe who sometimes appeared in the densest part of the fog. He was always in the distance, a hazy silhouette that never got closer and never got farther away. Most kids thought it was just a spooky story. A young counselor named Ben knew that summer, thought it was ridiculous. He was determined to prove it was a trick of the light. One morning, he took a canoe out with a few early rising campers, all no older than 10. The fog was like a thick, white wall. And then they saw him, a dark shape in a canoe, motionless, about 100 yards out. The kids went silent, their eyes wide. Ben just smirked. "Watch this," he said, and started paddling hard straight for the figure. He told the kids to wait by a small rocky outcropping. The figure didn't move as Ben's canoe cut through the water towards it. He got closer and closer, but the fog swirled, and for a moment he lost sight of it. When the mist cleared, he was right where the canoe should have been. But it was empty. Just an old, weathered birch bark canoe drifting aimlessly. There were no paddle marks in the water around it, no sign of anyone. A chill went down Ben's spine. He turned his canoe around and paddled frantically back towards the outcropping where he'd left the children. As he got closer, he could see their small shapes on the shore, huddled together. They were all staring at something, or someone. Standing silently beside them, his clothes dark and dripping with lake water, was a tall, gaunt man. Ben couldn't see his face in the fog, but he didn't need to. He knew, with a certainty that turned his blood to ice, that it was the man from the canoe.
Some curses aren't spoken. They don't come from ancient books or rituals whispered under a full moon. The most powerful curses, the ones that truly last, are born from silence. They take root in the dark soil of secrets, watered by the things an entire town agrees to forget. It's a uniquely American kind of horror, one that begins not with a scream, but with a quiet, collective turning of the back. And in some places, you can still feel that coldness today. Take a trip to Skidmore, Missouri. On a hot July morning in 1981, the town bully, a man named Ken McElroy, was shot to death in bold daylight in the middle of the street. He was in his truck with his wife. The town square was full. By all accounts, there were at least 45 witnesses, 45 people who saw the two shooters, who heard the crack of the rifles, who watched a man die. When the sheriff arrived, no one had seen a thing. Not one person. To this very day, no one has ever been charged. They say McElroy was a truly evil man who had terrorized the community for years, and the town simply decided to solve its own problem. But a wrong is a wrong, and a killing is a killing. The story goes that the silence that fell over Skidmore that day never really left. It seeped into the ground, poisoning the roots of the town itself. In the years that followed, Skidmore began to wither. Businesses that had been there for generations shuttered their windows. The bank failed under mysterious circumstances. Families moved away and the population dwindled. It became a place haunted by an unspoken truth, a town that bought its peace with a murder, and in doing so, cursed itself to a slow, quiet decay. The curse of Skidmore isn't a ghost. It's the heavy weight of a shared secret. But sometimes the fear of a curse is so strong, so palpable, it drives people to commit horrors far worse than any hex. In the rolling hills of York County, Pennsylvania, there is a region steeped in a unique brand of American folk magic, a blend of Christian faith and German superstition known as powwow. For generations, people there believed in the power of charms to heal and hexes to harm. In 1928, a man named John Blymeyer became utterly convinced that a local farmer and suspected witch, Nelson Remeyer, had placed a curse on him. Blymeyer claimed the hex was killing him slowly. He couldn't keep a job, his health was failing, and his mind was clouded with a constant, unshakable dread. Desperate, he sought the help of a local powwow practitioner, a young woman who told him the only way to break the curse was to get a lock of Remeyer's hair and bury his personal book of spells, his grimoire. So Blymeyer, along with two young accomplices, went to Nelson Remeyer's secluded farmhouse late one night. Their plan was simple, to steal the book and the hair. But Remeyer, a large and powerful man, fought back. A struggle ensued, a brutal, clumsy fight in the dark. The three men, consumed by their supernatural terror, beat and strangled Remeyer to death. They then ransacked the house, searching for the spellbook they believed held Blymeyer's life in its pages. They never found it. After they fled, something strange happened. A fire broke out in the farmhouse. But the story locals tell is that the fire acted in an unnatural way. It consumed much of the house, but when the authorities arrived, they found the flames had refused to touch the room where Nelson Remeyer's body lay, as if the dark energy of the murder had created a space too cold even for fire. Blymeyer and his accomplices were caught, their belief in a curse no defense for the very real crime they committed. The event became known as the Hex Hollow Murder, a chilling testament to how the fear of the supernatural can create monsters of everyday men. But what if the mark of a curse wasn't hidden in misfortune, but displayed for all to see? In the quiet coastal town of Bucksport, Maine, stands a granite monument to the town's founder, Colonel Jonathan Buck. It's an imposing, respectable memorial for a town father, but on its surface is a dark stain, an unmistakable shape that has baffled and disturbed residents for over 200 years. It looks like a woman's leg and foot, perfectly outlined in the gray stone. The legend, whispered for centuries, is that Colonel Buck presided over the execution of a woman accused of witchcraft.
As she was put to death, she cursed him, proclaiming that she would dance on his grave forever. Years later, when the monument was erected, the strange stain appeared. No amount of cleaning could remove it. It's been scrubbed with bleach, blasted with sand, and according to some stories, the entire stone block has been replaced, only for the ghostly image of the leg to slowly, inexplicably reappear. It remains there today, a permanent public mark of a centuries-old curse, a chilling reminder that some stains can never be washed away.
Of course, curses aren't just relics of a superstitious past. They found new life in the digital age. They spread not by word of mouth, but through forums and image boards, disguised as games or challenges. There's a story that makes the rounds online, a modern piece of folklore about something called a sympathy hex. It's not about wishing harm on an enemy, but about inviting a minor, harmless spirit into your home for a short time to keep it from being lonely. The ritual is simple, easily done by bored teenagers in a suburban basement with chalk, a few candles, and words copied from a website. It's presented as a harmless ghost story, a game. But the curse that follows is subtle and far from harmless. It doesn't announce itself with floating objects or terrifying apparitions. It works like a slow-acting poison on the family itself. It begins with a string of bad luck. The father's promotion at work inexplicably falls through. The mother comes down with a persistent illness the doctors can't diagnose. Then the psychological erosion starts. Arguments break out over nothing. A quiet paranoia settles over the house. Family members start to suspect each other of hiding things. They hear whispers on the baby monitor that sound like their own voices, twisted with malice. The true horror of this modern curse is that it doesn't break the house. It breaks the family inside it, turning love into suspicion and trust into fear, until the home is just a collection of isolated, lonely people trapped in a quiet, creeping dread they accidentally invited in. But of all the tales of American curses, one stands alone, so well documented, so profoundly strange, that it remains the only case in the nation's history where a government entity officially acknowledged a death by supernatural means. It is the story of the Bell Witch. It began in 1817 on the farm of John Bell in Adams, Tennessee. The Bells were a respected, hardworking family living a simple life on the frontier. The first sign was an animal. John Bell saw a creature in his cornfield with the body of a dog and the head of a rabbit. He shot at it, and it vanished. Soon after, the sounds began inside their log home. Faint scratchings on the walls, then knocking, then the sound of a person choking and gagging. The invisible force soon focused its torment on the family, particularly the youngest daughter, Betsy. It would pull her hair, slap her face, and leave welts and bruises on her skin. Soon the entity developed a voice, a faint, high-pitched whisper that grew stronger over time. It claimed its name was Kate, the spirit of a disgruntled former neighbor of Bell's named Kate Batts, who believed he had cheated her in a land deal. On her deathbed, Batts had supposedly sworn a curse that she would haunt John Bell and his family forever. Kate, as the entity became known, was not a simple poltergeist. It was intelligent, cunning, and terrifyingly articulate. Visitors would flock to the Bell farm to witness the phenomenon. Kate would converse with them, revealing their deepest secrets. It could quote, word for word, two different sermons being delivered at the exact same time in churches miles apart. For years, the entity tormented the family, its hatred focused squarely on John Bell, whom it called Old Jack. It tormented him relentlessly, promising it would one day kill him. John Bell's health began to decline. He suffered from seizures and neurological symptoms that baffled his doctors. In the winter of 1820, after a particularly violent seizure, he fell into a coma and died. Shortly after his death, the family found a small, strange vial in the medicine cabinet. Kate's voice filled the cabin, boasting that it had given Old Jack a dose of the vial's contents while he slept. To test it, they gave a drop to the farm cat, which died instantly. John Bell's death was attributed to the entity, and the legend was cemented. Kate lingered for a short time, tormenting the rest of the family, before finally announcing it would depart. but promised to return in 7 years. And, some say, in the quiet hills of Tennessee, in the place where the Bell Farm once stood, it never truly left.